Good morning. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson, and we're continuing our study entitled Recommended Reading. And today I would like to recommend that you read the Gospel of John. It's hard to say that I have a favorite gospel because each one is different and each one is necessary. But if you forced me and you had a gun to the head of a puppy or something, I would have to say John. John is my favorite gospel, although it's the toughest to me. Um, when Jesus spends a lot of red ink ranting to the Pharisees in John's gospel, which he does, um, some of the things that he says are some of the hardest things for me to understand of all Jesus's teaching. But John, I mean, there's just John. John is an old man writing almost certainly in the 90s. Um, and John already has access to the other three gospels. And John knows what has not been included yet. And so in John's gospel, we get the names of people. We find out that the person who anointed Jesus' head and feet the week that he was betrayed, the one who used the nard to anoint him for his burial, we find out that that was Mary of Bethany. We also find out in John's gospel that the person who griped about it was Judas Iscariot. So John is the one who gives us details and names names. John also, uh, the language is so simple. When you learn New Testament Greek, the first place you go to read Greek is John's Gospel because the language is so very simple, but the truths are so profound. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. This is the simplest Greek in all the New Testament. This is see spot run spot run. And yet, the truth that it communicates is so profound. It's as profound as Paul in Colossians 3. And I think John also had access to the book of Colossians, the letter to the Colossians, because so many of the truths that he remembers Jesus teaching are the very ones that Paul is recording in Colossians chapter 3. I want to say a word about how each man begins his gospel and how far back they go. So Mark goes the least far back. Mark does not deal with the birth of Jesus at all. Mark only goes back as far as the ministry of John the Baptist. Matthew goes through the genealogy. He does deal with the birth of Jesus, and with the genealogy, he goes all the way back to Abraham. Luke also deals with the birth of Jesus, but in his genealogy, he goes all the way back to the creation of Adam and to God creating Adam. John does not deal with the birth of Jesus because we have two long accounts of that, but he goes back further still. Because whereas Luke goes back to let us make man in our own image, John goes all the way back to in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Something that Philo of Alexandria has already pointed out 100 years before John wrote this, is that when God created the universe, he used words. He used logos. And he used that to communicate to a Greek audience, particularly an educated Greek audience, particularly Stoics. The things that you think about logos, we've known this all along. But the logos isn't impersonal. The logos has a name. The logos is Yahweh, our God. Our God is mind, is intelligence, and he created all the universe with word. And John tells us that as well. In the beginning was the word, because it's what's in Genesis. God used words. God said, God spoke, and everything was created. But John tells us that the words God spoke, the power to create through word came from the word, came from Jesus himself. John's an amazing gospel in that he is the most consciously theological. He's setting things on a cosmic scale, and he's hoping that we will understand things in terms of the victory of good over evil, of light versus darkness. In fact, he uses those kinds of words in all of his writing, all these antitheses, life and death, darkness and light, and frames everything in terms of those antitheses. He uses the number seven to build his gospel around. There's seven I ams. There are seven signs. Yeah, there are seven primary encounters in John's gospel. He just makes clear that completion is achieved in Jesus because seven is the number of completion. He tells us things that we would want to know if we only had the other three gospels and we didn't know. If we read the other three gospels, we read about the Last Supper. I would think, man, what did he say? What did he say to them on that night? I'm sure he had a lot to say, and John knows that, and John gives us that. John gives us chapters full, 13 through 17, of what happened that night. It's the biggest thing that he talks about in his gospel is what happened the night they had the Last Supper. And he tells us how Jesus washed their feet in the middle of supper. He tells us that Jesus talked to them about going away. I am the way, the truth, and the life. About the Holy Spirit, I'm sending you a helper, and and he'll tell you everything you need to know. And then he prayed for them and for us as well in 17 before he went into the Garden of Gethsemane. And he gives us Jesus' long prayer in chapter 17. I mean, what a gift he gives to us, wanting to know these things that we didn't know, that we would have wanted to know had we not had his gospel. Um, and he connects back to the other gospels. I think the best example of this I can give you, of him reaching back and connecting himself to the other gospels, is Luke 5 and John 21. John 21 makes only about half as much sense if we don't already know Luke 5. In Luke 5, when Jesus called Peter to be an apostle, there was the miracle of the great catch of fish. And it is then when Jesus says, "Follow me," to Peter. And then in John 21, after Peter has betrayed Jesus 3 times, Jesus gives him the opportunity 3 times to say, "I love you," and calls him again and says, "Follow me." But that only happens after they have a great catch of fish. And he goes back to the beginning. But we wouldn't know that if we didn't already have Luke's gospel. But at the end, there's a real symmetry that we have that we didn't know until John told us about it. I'm sure that most of us think of John as their favorite gospel, if only for John 3:16. We love this gospel, and we love the accounts we have in this gospel. Before we leave, we've talked about, Jack Lewis saying we always have to ask ourselves, what is this and what it's about? And we saw Luke at the beginning of his gospel answer that question by giving us in the prologue to his gospel what he was writing and why. And John tells us the same thing, but at the end of his gospel. In John chapter 20, verses 30 and 31, many other signs, therefore, Jesus also performed in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book, but these have been written so that you may believe that Jesus, the human being from Nazareth, is the Christ, the Son of God, and that in believing you may have life in his name. Now, this is specific and important. I've written this so that you may experience and believe in Jesus as human and divine. Jesus from Nazareth is the Messiah, the Son of God. And that when you get this, that the Jesus that, as he says at the beginning of 1 John, what we saw with our own eyes, heard with our own ears, touched with our own hands, that this person is fully divine at the same time he's fully human. When you get this, then you have life. You have life in his name, the name Jesus Christ, human and divine. You have life in his name. And every one of the signs in the book of the 7 signs are demonstrate Jesus is fully human, fully divine. From the wedding at Cana in Galilee, going to a wedding, they run out of beverage. His mom says, do something about it. There's nothing more human than that story. But then he changes water to wine, and his disciples believe. And all the way to the 7th sign, the raising of Lazarus. The guy who's been dead 4 days, never been done before, clearly demonstrates his power over life and death and his divinity, and yet he weeps and ugly cries for his friends. It's experiencing Jesus in this way. That's the reason he wrote this gospel, and he certainly delivers, because that's why we love John so much and read John that way. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes, which is now 10. When we're together next time, we're going to talk about some of Paul's letters. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word.